As United States Senator, I led the bill for environmental justice, bringing together activists from all around the country to put in teeth so that environmental activists have the power to change their communities, to control their own destiny. And as President of the United States, I will make sure that we do what's necessary for environmental justice, access to clean air, to clean water, and to deal with the urgencies of climate change by making sure we rejoin the Paris Climate Accords, re-up our commitments to clean energy standards, and make sure that we are dealing aggressively with a bold green future. And finally, let me just say that with climate change, we have 10 years to deal with it, but vulnerable communities are going to feel the impacts first. And so this cannot be something where we don't act with a sense of urgency. And we've got to be creative in the way we're going about it, both here by making sure we're investing in green technologies, giving those kind of tax breaks we've given to oil companies and coal companies now to green companies and renewable energy companies. And we have to lead in the globe because we just produce 14% of the problem. Unless we're starting to get involved in developing nations and give them the assistance and support to make sure that they are dealing with climate change too, we will not be successful.
Just a quick follow-up to you, Senator. We know that climate change also drives migration. You talked about reaching out and helping not just struggling communities in the United States, but struggling communities outside the United States where migration might be driven because of changes in the climate. We just saw the current president use a national emergency, declare a national emergency on the issue of immigration in the southern border. Would you, as president, use national emergency powers regarding climate change? Is it that serious of a threat that you would use national emergency powers?
So national emergency is a legal issue as well as sort of triggering certain actions. I'm talking about it is a national emergency now, that we have to act with that sense of urgency. And if you look at the United States military reports, they are showing exactly what you're saying. The climate crisis is going to cause refugee crises, famines. It's going to cause instability on the planet Earth like nothing we have seen before within the next decade to 2 decades. So we need to make sure that we are dealing with it with that same sense of urgency and start to use the levers that we have from our aid to make sure we're empowering people to move from coal to renewable energies and to making sure that we're dealing with stability in countries, doing the kind of things that don't destabilize nations, but empower nations to have self-determination and deal with their own issues.
So through the normal process, not through a national emergency?
Again, through the normal process.
Process. I think we have some wonderful audience members that are going to ask some questions. So let's have Mabry come up.
How you doing?
Good. I'm not sure. Oh.
Hi,
where am I looking?
Booker. I'm right here.
Okay. Oh, right here.
And you're up.
Awesome.
What question do you have?
So my name is Maria Teresa Mabry. I'm with Mi Gente, and I'm also a fellow with the Electoral Justice Project with the Movement for Black Lives. I'm from Phoenix, Arizona.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, in your view, is taxing the wealthy and corporations a racial justice issue? And if so, what is your commitment to fighting for both racial justice and economic justice?
Thank you very much. So, absolutely. The way what we've been doing right now is taking our national treasure on this theory that somehow is going to help all the people by giving trillions of dollars of tax breaks to the wealthiest in our country and the wealthiest in corporations, who ultimately, if you've seen recently, the recent tax record, some of our biggest corporations are paying effectively zero in taxes. This is absolutely a racial justice issue and an economic justice issue where you have Americans now looking at a nation where corporate profits are at an 85-year high and wages are at a 60-year low. I live, the only person in the United States Senate, I live in a black and brown inner city community that economically is below the poverty line. And I watch my neighbors who work full-time jobs catch extra shifts where they can, and when they go to my local bodega, they still have to use food stamps to meet the minimum basic needs of a family. That is unacceptable, that is injustice, and because it disproportionately affects African American, Latinos, and minorities, it is a racial injustice issue as well. And so we have to fix that by making our tax code reflect our values. And that's why no more bank shots, this idea that if we send it up, somehow it's going to come down. We're going to now make sure, if I'm president, that we have a tax code directly focused on working people. That's why I've supported the RISE Act, which takes the earned income tax credit and blows it up to almost twice the size. My RISE credit would get families about $8,000 back. It would lift 150 million working American salaries. It would take about poverty rates and cut them by a third in our nation. And even more that, it would change the definition of work. Because there are so many people who have to stay home and take care of a spouse with dementia or a special needs child. That is work too, and they should qualify for a credit.
Yeah.
All right?
Thank you so much.
Thank
you
you
for asking the question. We have another question in the back from another audience member. Come on down.
All right.
You are welcome.
Thank you.
Hello, Senator Booker.
Hello.
My name is Charisma Darden. I am a student at the illustrious and notable Texas Southern University. My question is about Ilhan Omar. She was recently critical of the outsized influence of AIPAC in determining U.S. foreign policy, including funding of Israel. Subsequently, she has received condemnation from the president and members of her own party, as well as death threats. What will you do as president to protect the right of courageous women of color to criticize U.S. policy, even when directed at allies?
Charisma, thank you for your question. The criticisms of Congresswoman Omar, what Donald Trump has been saying about her, is reprehensible. It is trafficking in Islamophobia, and it should be condemned by everyone. This kind of selective condemnation should be a chorus of people condemning it. And more than this, the kind of language our president uses, especially about black women in power, the kind of language this president uses, it is toxic. It fuels the kind of hate we see in our communities manifesting itself in the kind of terrorism that has been most seen in our nation since 9/11. Most of the terrorist attacks in our nation since 9/11 have been right-wing extremist attacks. The majority of those have been white supremacist attacks. And so when you have a president uttering such bigotry and uttering such racist attacks, talking about nations where black and brown people have come from in this nation as shithole countries, that is giving license to hate and to violence that we should not be tolerating. And so it's not just important to be an ally. As one of our great black women has said in the past, it's not enough just to say, I'm not a racist. We must, where racism exists, all be anti-racist. Because if we are not dealing with this issue in our country, we will continue to see these kind of attacks, and we will continue to see the kind of vicious violence that has been affecting our nation, from black churches to synagogues to Muslim mosques as well.
Thank you.
Thank
you
you.
for the question.
Thank you.
So, Senator, the good folks at She the People are asking a fundamental question to each of the, as of Thursday, 20 of you, for now, who are running for president on the Democratic side, 20 and counting. And I guess the question would be fundamentally for women of color, with all of those options and choices, why should women of color choose you?
That's a great question. Well, you know, as a man that was raised by a strong black woman, who understood and taught me from my very earliest of ages the debt that I owe. From Mamie Till to Fannie Lou Hamer, from Barbara Jordan, all the way to people who led us in the abolitionist movement. We in America owe a debt to the championship and the leadership and the activism of women of color. And so I began my career, as I've said, in a black and brown community. The first person to tell me to run for office was the tenant president of some projects called Brick Towers, who wanted me in the fight and to remember where I came from. That's why I still live in that same neighborhood today. And so I'm a big believer that you can't lead the people if you don't love the people. And as Brother Dr. West says, what does love look like in public? It looks like justice. And so women of color can trust me as someone for my entire career has been rooted in the communities that have empowered me to be who I am today. And all of my fights, even in the United States Senate, when I got there, there was not diversity. I fought with Brian Schatz to not make sure that Chuck Schumer changed the rules to start showing our diversity statistics for Democratic senators that have moved to get a lot more diversity there. From taking on issues that are loyal to my communities that aren't talked about enough. Like, why does sickle cell research get so much less funding than other illnesses and diseases that affect less people? Why can we be a nation that has maternal mortality rates, maternal mortality for black women 3-4 times higher than white women? And so my fights have been fights that have shown who I am and shown my loyalty. And when I am president of the United States, these will continue to be the kind of fights that I take on. And I will make sure that this nation is finally who we say we are, a nation of liberty and justice for all.
Would you pledge to have a woman running mate?
The question, if you didn't hear it, is will I pledge to have a woman running mate? I will have a woman running mate. To me, it's really clear that we do that.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. And finally, in your first 100 days, how will women of color know that you're a president for us and our communities?
You know, this is something that to me is so apparent when you look at leaders. Who they surround themselves with, who they put in positions of power, because inclusion is not an adornment. It's not something that just looks for the cameras and the TVs. We know from all the research, having inclusive teams around any leader is essential for having great teams that are effective and that get things done. And so in my first 100 days, you will see teams like I have had since I was the mayor of the city of Newark, since I got to the Senate and didn't just have diverse teams in my office, but made sure that we had more diverse teams in the Senate. To make sure that we are fighting for things like I am on my campaign, not just for diversity and inclusion, but hell, you can't campaign wrong and then think you're gonna govern right. And so we talk about the issues that are legitimate and needed to be fought for in our community. And so by the team that I form and the actions that I take in my first 100 days, it will send a clear signal to my mom and to all the people in Newark, New Jersey who first put me in the game that I have not forgotten who I am, where I've come from, and the people that got me to where I am today. All right?
Senator Booker, thank you so much for joining us. The She the People, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
We'll come here.